Welcome to the This Week I'm Into podcast. This week we have a special episode of Pete and Paul's Hobby Hour. I'm your co-host, Pete Tyler. Right now I'm with my friend and co-host, Paul Imbragulio. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Hi, Hans. I'm doing so great. I know that this is going to be a slippery episode. That's not funny. Let's try this one again. I'm doing great, Hans. I'm really loving that you dressed up for this episode, bright and pink. That's a good one.
Shout out to our
today.
Shout out to our 2 video listeners.
Yeah, Hans dressed on theme.
I did. I dressed on theme. I honestly didn't know what we were getting into today, but I'm sure if you're listening to the podcast, you probably know because it's in the episode title. But Paul, you have something you wanted to bring in to talk about today, which was what topic, Paul?
I wanted to talk about salmon today. As we always like to talk about more than you probably want to listen to, it's things that are related to where we live. So I'm sure Hans will do an architecture episode one day for us for Chicago. But today I wanted to drop a little bit of Seattle lore. Not that salmon are only in Seattle. But I thought it'd be fun to talk about the salmon that spawn in the Seattle area. Because last year I got to go to their breeding grounds and I just realized I had a lot I wanted to talk about. So I thought I'd make this an episode for us.
All right, absolutely. I don't know if that's where I thought we were going today, but I'm all for it.
It's salmon sex.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
We'll get into it. Hans, what do you know about salmon? Have you ever been to see salmon in Seattle before?
No, I never have, and I actually don't even know what you're referring to right now. So I look forward to learning about it. My experience with salmon is I like to eat salmon. It's a tasty dish.
Really? I do. I'm about to talk about them, like baby ones, and you're telling me you want to eat them? How are they going to feel safe in this environment?
I have some relatives that go up to Alaska every once in a while and fish for salmon there. And
that's cool.
Anyway, tangent already, Paul. I have family members that go up to Alaska and fish for salmon sometimes. And I am occasionally the lucky recipient of the salmon they bring back. Absolutely delicious. But my grandpa has a story of fishing in Alaska, and they tell you that if you have like fish in your cooler and a bear approaches you, like don't protect the fish, like just give it them, right? Which makes sense, right? But
yeah, you don't want to be a statistic in Fat Bear Week.
Exactly. So my grandpa has a story where a bear was like approaching him and he literally used his fly fishing rod as like the hook at the end to like shoo it away. So if you're ever in Alaska, right, there's brown bears, which are the scary bears, right? Like apparently black bears are the ones you can scare off, but brown bears are the ones who play dead. So tons of brown bears that are like can be aggressive. So my grandpa has a good story about like defending himself with a fly fishing rod. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, the salmon they got, absolutely delicious.
It was worth fighting for.
That's exactly right.
Have you ever been with them?
No, I never have. And besides that, I'm gonna say like I don't have. I can't think of any like real experience I've had with salmon. So I look forward to what you have to say. I'm all ears, Paul. What originally got you into this, and like why? What direction did you want to take this?
Yeah. So really what it was is in Seattle, it's like where a lot of salmon like are from. That's where they spawn. So there's three major types of salmon that are bred here. There might be more, but there's the 3 main ones. There's sockeye salmon, coho salmon, and Chinook salmon. And really close to where I grew up is this thing called the Ballard locks, which it's just locks, like, you know, the things that like help boats move like up a river or from like ocean to freshwater. And that's exactly what we have here. It separates the saltwater that's in the Puget Sound to the freshwater that's part of like Lake Union, Lake Washington, and all the rivers that go up from there. So the salmon are, you know, they breed in freshwater, right? And then so they have to make it from the ocean through the Puget Sound, through these locks, and up to the freshwater. And so as a kid, we'd go to the locks, like watch the boats, like come up and go back and forth, right? Fun activity for your kids. But there they have a salmon ladder, which if you've never heard of a salmon ladder, it's basically like the bypass for fish like salmon to go upstream from the saltwater to the freshwater. And so just like growing up with a kid and, you see like hundreds and hundreds of salmon coming up this thing every day during like this time of year where they come back to freshwater. Yes, it just like makes you like super excited. And it's like something that, well, Hans, when like you come in the summer, I'll definitely have you go look at because it's super cool.
Cool. Yeah.
And the reason that I want to talk about it now is this last summer was the year that me and my girlfriend moved back to Seattle. And so I was taking her, and as I was looking it up, there was a advertisement for this thing called like Salmon Days out in a town called Issaquah, which is like up the stream, like up the freshwater rivers.
Very nice,
where the salmon breed. And so I got to see the whole process of like how they like are breeding them and like that whole process. So I thought it was cool. I learned way more than I ever expected to about the salmon breeding process. So I thought it would be worth sharing. That's where this originated from.
Okay.
Long story.
I love
long
it.
story short.
I love it. As far as I know, Paul, just about the breeding process, the salmon, they live both there. They start and end in freshwater, right? And then live in
that's correct.
saltwater in between. Okay. All right. Will you just lay out the salmon life cycle for me here?
Yeah. Okay. So they all have a very similar life cycle depending on the species, but it's like the time that they'll spend in each part of it that might be a little different. And this is just a generic, right? There might be some differences. Okay. So like you were saying, salmon are born in freshwater. Normally they're born in like a river bed. If they're wild, or I'm assuming a hatchery, right, would build them or will breed them in some sort of tank. So when they're really small, I think they're called like smolt or something. They're like tiny little fish. And they'll live in the freshwater for somewhere between, depending on the species, like a couple of months up to 1 to 2 years, depending on the species.
Okay.
So once they become of age and they're ready to go to the ocean, they swim out to the ocean, which is kind of cool because, their whole physiological like bodies or whatever change because, as you can imagine, a fish that lives in freshwater is not the same kind of fish that like lives in saltwater. The ability to like live in a saltwater environment, you probably have to change quite a bit. So it's pretty cool. So they have to change to be able to live in saltwater, which I don't actually know much about how they change from little fish to big fish to go into saltwater, but we'll kind of get back to that. Whatever. So they live in the ocean. Most of the time, at least the salmon that are born in the Seattle area, they kind of go up towards Alaska. So it's probably the same kind of fish that you said your grandfather used to catch. So they'll swim like up the Puget Sound, kind of like up the coast, and they'll live in like the waters of like the north part of the Puget Sound for a couple of years. So they normally live up there from like 2 to 5 years, depending on the species, eating fish and shrimp or, other like small crustaceans.
Okay.
Seems like they eat a lot of different things. Then this is like the weirdest part, and I still like am unable to comprehend how they do it. But when they're babies or like small fish, they learn where they're born based off of, people say it's mostly based off smell of the environment, and then something to do with magnetic fields.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that.
You've heard that, right? So
yeah.
So the way that, so once the fish are like, hey, I'm old enough to come breed, they'll swim back to the exact location that they were born, like the same riverbed. And so like that's even to the point where like, in Seattle, there's a bunch of like different rivers that all meet at the same big lake, right? That you'll have fish that like know which like specific river off of this lake that they should be going up. And so so a combination of like the smell of their home from when they were kids like 4 years ago, and something to do with magnetic fields, they're able to go back to their birth location, breed, and then salmon are one of those kind of fish where they only breed one time and then they die.
Yeah.
So they'll die in the river, and then that's a whole like other ecosystem thing where like it's like a big like animals come and eat them. They like fertilize the soil and all the like riverbeds and stuff nearby. So that's kind of like all in all like the total salmon life cycle.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. The reason that electromagnetism thing doesn't completely shock me is because I know it exists in other places in nature. Like
Yeah,
I've
like
heard
birds, right?
birds migratory patterns, whales migratory patterns, and I've heard like sharks also have like a sixth sense where they detect EMG, like EMG outside of light, of course.
Yeah.
And so I know like there is some animals that use electromagnetism as a way of guidance. How they do it and how a salmon could know the exact fork of the river that they spawn from. That part
It's
is
crazy.
that seems like a novel of a marvel of science. Like that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah. I just have no idea how it could possibly work. Like I can't even remember what street to take sometimes that I've been down like 50 times. And these fish can
Yeah.
leave a river one time and know how to come back to it 3 to 4 years later is just like unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so within that large life cycle, there's a couple
Yeah.
things that I thought were like particularly cool based off at
Okay.
least the lived experience that I've had with salmon.
Okay.
So the really cool thing in Seattle, if you ever come to Seattle or another place that has salmon, I think a really cool place to check out is the way that they get from saltwater to freshwater.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have locks here, they have built a salmon ladder, but that's not really the only way that salmon will go from freshwater to saltwater. Actually, there's a park nearby where there isn't locks, and they can naturally just like swim up like any I think it's called brackish water, right? Like the connection between salt and
Yeah.
fresh water.
Mm-hmm.
And there's ways that humans have built infrastructure to like help that happen. So I'll get back to the locks, but I know there's one in the Netherlands where they have all the dikes that block off the Netherlands from the ocean, and it's created like this big freshwater pool, or not pool, it's like huge freaking ocean thing in the middle
Yeah.
of it.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of like a lock that like has like set locations that it goes on, it's almost like a huge winding thing. And what it allows is a slower gradient from freshwater to saltwater.
Okay.
Because like natural brackish water, right, has like a gradient of like ocean to fresh, and it allows time for all of the changes that has to go on in these salmon to allow them to live in freshwater again, right? Because it's not like a 1-to-1. Like you can't just like swim from saltwater to freshwater and be okay. It takes a long time. I don't know how long, but it takes like a decent amount of time for their body to adjust, like physiologically, to be able to survive in that environment. And there's actually some changes that their bodies go through, which is like really cool. Okay, so anyways, the one that's more local to me is the Ballard locks. So same idea where basically traversing the locks, there's a pathway for this water to like skirt around the gates of the locks where the boats go. And so this allows the salmon basically to like hop up. Imagine kind of like a stepping set of waterfalls that they can hop up.
Mm-hmm.
And so similarly, right, it helps create that gradient of like saltwater to freshwater. And like I was saying, it takes some time for the salmon to change. So there's actually this really cool viewing room, and you'll see that the salmon kind of like swim there for a while. And I learned this year that the reason that I always thought that they would sit there was because they were just not strong enough to make it through the current that's like coming down.
True. What if they're not good jumpers,
So yeah, so I thought that, right? And so I was talking to the lady this year who, like works at the park, like knows a lot about the fish. And she was saying that they go through all these changes. And so that they kind of like to sit for a while in this like in between water to make those changes. Okay, so let's talk about some of those changes, because I'm sure
that's fascinating, actually. Yes, I am. Yes, that is exactly
I'm
my
sure
next
there's,
question.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot more, and I can't talk about like specifically about like all of them, but there's 3 that I think are really cool. And none of them have to do with how they're able to survive in freshwater. That part completely escapes me. I don't understand it. But there's 3 that are pretty cool. The first one, and I don't know if this is for all salmon, but I believe sockeye salmon grow this big jaw. So if you ever see salmon in the wild, they kind of have like a normal, like kind of diamond looking mouth, right? Like nothing crazy. But I don't know if you've ever seen photos of other salmon that have kind of like a hooked jaw.
Yeah, I have seen
the
that.
bottom.
Yeah.
So that's something that they grow when they come back to freshwater, and I believe it's for mating purposes. It's almost like a fighting mechanism, which they don't need out in the ocean because that's like not the kind of jaw they need to eat, but they grow this jaw as part of like a, you know, like a mating dominance thing.
So
that's kind
is
of like
that, let me ask you, Paul, is that purpose wise, is that for like fighting other salmon males, or is it more of like, I have a big jaw? You know how like birds have like fancy colors to attract mates? Is it more like, I have a big jaw, so I'm
believe
attractive?
it's for fighting other males, but I bet it's probably both.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to claim one or the other, but from what I read and what was told, I believe it's for fighting, but I've never seen them fight. So it could just be one of those like, look at my big jaw kind of things.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. Something to look up for people, because I'm not going to do it right now.
No, completely fair. Just throwing it out there.
Okay, so the second one, which is really interesting, is why they turn pink. So similar to flamingos, they eat a lot of shrimp and other crustaceans. Okay. So the reason that they turn pink is that their body like pushes out all these, I think they're called carotenoids.
Okay.
Whatever makes flamingos pink, it's the same thing that makes salmon pink. So as they come into freshwater, all these pigments that have been in their bodies from the things that they've eaten push out towards their skin, and that's why they become so pink. So, well, you know, when you're like eating caught salmon in the wild, right, their skin is pink because you catch them in the ocean, right? And so all of that pink like pushes towards their skin as they become in freshwater. So if you ever come and look at the breeding salmon, they don't look like your normal salmon that you would buy at the grocery store because they're like more pink, which is super, super cool because you can like watch like the change in colors. I mean, it's not active, you're watching it, but you can see like the difference in colors, which is super neat.
That is fascinating. Okay, that's a really good fun fact. The same mechanism that turns flamingos pink is also what turns salmon pink. I never knew that. That's actually really fascinating.
Same type of pigment, yeah.
So are you telling me if I got a salmon earlier in its lifespan than compared to later, it would be less pink? I assume it would be more of a white color.
Well, this is a really interesting question, Hans, and I was going to talk about this a little later. So I don't know if maybe you caught a salmon like at 1 year old out in the ocean, if it would be less pink because it hadn't had time to build it up. I'm not going to claim that. But something that I was going to talk about is farm raised versus wild caught salmon.
Sure.
And because farm raised salmon don't eat like normal ocean creatures like the shrimp and whatever else are in the water, if you had cut like a regular farm caught salmon, no additive added, it would probably not be as pink at the very least as a wild caught salmon. You can see that in your normal store. Even if you like see it in a normal store, you'll see that it's not as pink.
Yeah. Yeah.
As part of the farming process, they actually feed it a pigment that makes it look more pink. So to your point, it is possible that natural salmon meat is not pink if they don't eat that kind of food.
I see. Yep. Okay, that makes sense. So the farm raised stuff, they're trying to make it look like the wild raised or wild caught stuff, which is what we're used to. So they try to make it look more pink. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Wait, Paul, before you mentioned two things, but there was three on your mind, right? We have the jaw changes, the color changes. What is the third change when they go from saltwater to freshwater?
Yeah, so you might wonder to yourself, now that you know that they change color when they go to freshwater, is why do I never see at the store pink salmon to buy, right? And it's because they stop eating when they come to freshwater. So like I was saying earlier, salmon only breed one time. So when they come to freshwater, their only goal is to go home and breed. So as part of that physiological change that I was saying is they make from saltwater to freshwater, they actually stop eating.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I don't know much about fishing, and it's probably a little bit due to people just not commercially fishing in lakes, but I would guess, at least in my head, what I thought was that you can't catch salmon in freshwater because they're not going to bite your line.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. That actually makes a lot of sense.
I don't think that that's why. Maybe there's rules against doing it, but because there's a lot of preservation and stuff about trying to regrow salmon populations. But anyways, yeah, they stop eating. So they're actually kind of on a timer. As soon as they switch over to freshwater, you don't eat anymore. You only have so long to live, even if, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's like one of the coolest things is that they literally stop eating. And so they just have so long until their energy runs out to breed and then pass away.
I have a couple thoughts. One, I think like from an evolutionary biology perspective, it's fascinating to me that they only breed once. Like that does not seem like life cycle wise as a recipe for longevity of a species. But here we are. So what do I know?
Well, they're also having, like thousands on thousands of babies per spawn. So, you hope that a couple work out.
That's the K related species versus R related species if you're a biologist right there. So some species have, hundreds and hundreds of spawn and hope like one or two of them survive. Some species have like one or two, like humans or elephants, and then take really good care of them to try to get those to survive. So there's a biology concept for you.
That's cool.
Look up K related species if you want to know more. But my other thought was, this is making me feel a lot worse about eating salmon roe with my sushi. If they only spawn once, I'm taking away their one chance. That stinks.
Yeah, but think about it. Those were the ones that just weren't meant to survive, Hans. And I bet you that a lot of those these days are probably farm raised.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
I wouldn't feel too bad.
It's just fascinating that they just stop eating. They like, I'm here to breed, and then I assume they die after that. So
yeah, it's super cool. And so then kind of moving on to the second part of like my personal experience. So after the locks, we went to this thing called like Salmon Days or Days of whatever it was out in Issaquah. And basically it was kind of like a little festival day around the hatchery that they had built in Issaquah. So as you probably know, salmon have probably been overfished in the past. So there's a lot of work to preserve wild salmon. But in doing so, a lot of the efforts are in breeding salmon to kind of help rebuild the population. And, eventually, like, hopefully there'll be wild salmon if they, like, live, enough life cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this really funny, time going to this festival. So, there's this tiny river. And I mean, like, when I say, like, this little river, it's more of a stream at this point, like, this far up the river.
Yeah, sure.
That if you were standing in it, Hans, it would probably like not make it to your knee, right?
Okay.
If you were standing in this river. So it's probably like 20 feet wide and 1 to 2 feet tall.
Okay.
Probably not even 2 feet tall. 2 feet tall on a rainy day.
Mm.
And so you look down over on this bridge over it, right? And this thing is absolutely packed with salmon. Like it's literally like the opening of a Disney line, to Disney World, where like it's just like salmon after salmon after salmon, just like completely covering like the whole thing.
Oh my god, so that would be fascinating to see. Actually,
it is so cool, and
I feel like I'd want to touch it, but
you can't go. You can't go down there. Yeah, so they won't let you down there. But like if you went to like a local place, you probably could go closer to one. I don't recommend it, but yeah. So it was really cool to see. Like you'd see them, and so the way they breed is they kind of like, and you didn't like see one doing it, but they kind of like kick up these rocks with their tummies and like create kind of like a crevice in the rocks to like breed. But anyways, so where we were, they basically create an artificial dam to kind of like stop them there, because this hatchery, what they do is they kind of divert like a little pathway into their tank where they catch the salmon, so then they can artificially breed them to have like a better chance of survival for those salmon. So unbeknownst to these salmon, they can catch only so many a day, so they kind of just like let them live in that river until they're like ready to let them in. But yeah, those salmon are going to get caught by the hatchery and artificially bred, which is good for the overall. They're not just killing the salmon, right? The salmon are going to die anyways. They're gonna breed them to make more of them.
Right. They're probably protecting the eggs from like bottom feeders,
predators,
right? Like there's probably tons of eggs in that one local area.
Yeah.
You could just have a field day if you were like catfish, just eating up all the eggs. But
no, exactly. Yeah. And so it was really cool because they kind of artificially dammed it. But I was talking to one of the guys there, and I was like, it's not that tall. What was really fun is the salmon, and I don't know like what behavior, kind of like how beavers like go to running water to try to stop it. I don't really know what like makes the salmons want to jump, but basically I for like 30 minutes I just stood on this bridge watching salmons jump at this artificial dam, like, and it's kind of like a diagonal dam, so it's not like a wall. They kind of like land like 2/3 up the way and then like slide back down, and it just like the whole time you just see them like jumping up and then sliding back down because they can't make it over it. The guy was saying that actually when it does rain and the water gets deeper, the only reason they can't get up right now is because there's not enough depth for the salmon to catch enough speed to jump it. But he said, yeah, if the water was deeper, like the salmon can jump really high.
Yeah,
and they can jump the artificial dam and actually go farther upstream and breed naturally if they were good enough.
Wait, that poses a really interesting thought experiment here. Is that at that point only the best jumpers are making it all the way upstream, so only the strongest, best salmon are making it all the upstream, and then their genetics will carry on to the next generation, and those are only going to be the strongest jumpers, and eventually all the way upstream you're going to have incredibly high jumping, high performing salmon all the way upstream.
Hey, I think that could be their goal. Unintentional, but yeah, so it was just like a really cool site, and it's like great work that they're doing. Then the other really, really cool fact that I learned. So this river, right, obviously now has a bunch of salmon that were grown in a hatchery and naturally come back there, right? Because it's like where they were born. They obviously like release them in that area, so they like grow up in that area and come back, even though they were hatched. But there's also wild salmon that do still breed in that area. And so the way that they tell them apart is there's a small fin that they have, it's like a tiny little fin on their back, like, okay, fish, head, tail, right? Just before their tail on the back, there's this little fin called like an adipose fin, which was described to me kind of like a tailbone, not in the sense that it's a tailbone of a fish, but in the fact that it's useless. Like it doesn't do anything.
Okay.
So hatch fish, they cut that fin off, so it's identifiable as a non-wild fish. And there might even be fishing laws where you have to like make sure that that's cut off if you're going to catch a fish, because you shouldn't be catching the wild ones.
Interesting.
So it's a way to tell the difference between a wild salmon and a hatch salmon, because all hatch salmon will have that fin cut off.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so that they were saying like with all their small smolt fish, they'll cut that off. So that's how you can tell the difference between a wild and a hatch raised salmon.
Okay, but if they are being caught in the artificial reservoir, right? So they, at that point, are they switching between generations from wild to hatched because they can't jump the reservoir?
Oh, I think they don't. I think they let the wild ones like do their thing.
Oh, okay.
I think they only breed the hatched ones.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah. So it was just so cool to see, and I highly recommend if you happen to be in this area, like salmon breeding time. It happens to be normally like mid-May through September. Different species come at different times, but generally there's like spikes within there depending on the type.
I'm with you, Paul. I'm so fascinated by what you've had to say, and I'm all for like salmon conservation. I feel like there's been a big push, especially in the Pacific Northwest, for salmon conservation. Their life cycles are absolutely fascinating. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's not something I've like thought about a ton, but it proposes interesting thoughts.
Yeah, they're a weird fish.
They are a weird fish. And they're tasty, so like
I'm not anti-eating salmon, for the record. I think they're very tasty, but it was just super cool to like learn about, how they survive if they don't get caught.
Well, yeah, you can eat salmon and also be pro conservation of salmon. Like I don't think those have to be mutually exclusive, but there's a smart way to do it, right? So
yeah, and I think that was like, I mean, I don't have much to say on the farm raised versus natural caught salmon, but it is like a cool concept. I don't know where they do it. I know they do it definitely in like the Nordic countries, like Norway, I think, is like a big one. But yeah, they've basically developed a way to grow these salmon in a farming environment where they have, they grow them from like little babies, probably very similar to how they grow them in a hatchery where they're not intending to eat them. but then they live in these huge like ocean cage net things, just like hundreds on hundreds of them in these huge nets. But yeah, and then, I was telling you earlier, right? Like they feed them this artificial feed that's not, like live animals. I think honestly, some of it's even like plant-based. Like it's not even just like meat or whatever the hell they actually eat. It's, some alternative. But that's why they don't like look like normal salmon. When you like buy them in the store, you'll see caught salmon looks different than farmed salmon.
Yeah.
To me personally, I don't know the difference. They all taste the same, and I'm going to buy whichever one, probably cheaper, to be completely honest with you.
Well, yeah.
But I think it's a really good like path towards sustainable salmon fishery, like fishing. Because obviously we have a huge problem with that. More than just salmon, on just general fishing. But I think it's a good alternative. So I'm pretty pro, as long as it tastes good.
Well, Paul, before we sign off, can I hit you with a fun fact that I've learned about salmon in the past?
Yeah, I love it.
So I've heard about, when you think about sushi, right? You probably think like salmon rolls are like, that's such a common roll.
Classic.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Originally in Japan, like salmon was considered like kind of a lower fish, and like eating salmon sushi was like, that was like kind of out of the question. Like that was like actually considered like not appetizing, I guess. But then it was actually Norway, and I thought of this because you brought up the Scandinavian countries, but Norway, Norway Trade and Commerce actually pitched Japan on salmon sushi, essentially. Norway had a surplus of salmon, and in order to bolster their trade, they started integrating salmon into sushi rolls, and it actually eventually took off in Japan. So when you think of salmon sushi, that's actually not a Japanese culinary it's not a Japanese culinary relation. It's actually, its origins are from Norway. So I don't know, you said Scandinavian country and I thought of that. So
Han's still hitting us with the Hans's fun facts.
Well,
sorry, I didn't give you a song
that was a
intro.
deep pull. So anyway, yeah, Paul, geez, okay, you gave me a lot of good things to think about. I would say you've spawned a lot of good ideas.
Yes.
Good job, buddy. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next week on the This Week I'm Into podcast. Hey everyone, Pete here. Thank you again so much for listening to the This Week I'm Into podcast. Well, that does it for Season 2. The This Week I'm Into podcast will be taking a break in May as we record and prepare for Season 3. But don't worry, we'll be back in early June with more fun hobbies and more fun guests. So until then, thank you again so much for listening, and we can't wait to see you then. Every year, salmon swim thousands of miles upstream. They battle currents, they leap waterfalls, they dodge predators. And for what?
To land in your mailbox, of course.
Introducing Salmon Scriber, the world's first salmon-themed subscription box.
Every month, we send you a carefully curated package inspired by the noble salmon. We're talking smoked salmon, survival tips, inspirational quotes like don't be afraid to spawn greatness, and our favorite, made by Hans, artisanal, hand-knitted salmon koozies.
We've got wild salmon facts, aquatically scented candles, and of course, your monthly Salmon of the Month trading card.
This month's card features Kyle, a sockeye with a dream, a vision board, and a surprisingly strong opinion on oat milk.
And did we mention the bonus content? Streamium subscribers get exclusive access to our sister podcast, Something's Fishy, where we deep dive into the lives of famous fish, the ethics of upstream travel, and the mystery of what salmon actually do at those hatcheries.
Don't wait, your salmon journey awaits. Whether you're a casual flounderer or a hardcore stream dreamer, Salmon Scriber brings you the river to your doorstep.
Go to salmonscriber.com and use promo code SWIMBACK to get your first box free and a complimentary waterproof friendship bracelet made from recycled kelp and broken fishing dreams.
That's salmonscriber.com, promo code SWIMBACK. Set your fish free. If they're yours, they'll leap waterfalls to get back.